Most people don't stay broke because they don't work hard enough. They stay broke because they're working inside a system designed to keep them exactly where they are. Think about that for a moment. You've been told your whole life that the answer is effort. Work more, hustle harder, grind longer. And yet the harder most people work, the further behind they seem to fall. That isn't a coincidence. That isn't bad luck. That is the system functioning exactly as intended. I've spent over 7 decades watching how money moves, how it accumulates, how it disappears. And the single most important thing I've learned isn't a stock tip or a formula. It's this. Most people are playing a game they were never taught the rules to, and they spend their entire lives losing, convinced that if they just try harder, the outcome will change. It won't. Not until they understand what game they're actually playing. Let me show you what I mean. There is a force I call the gravity of the ordinary. It is invisible. It is relentless. And almost no one talks about it. It's not poverty. It's not laziness. It's the accumulated weight of every small financial decision that feels reasonable in the moment. The subscription you forgot about, the car payment that stretched a little too far, the raise you spent before it arrived. And together these decisions create a kind of financial gravity that pulls you down slowly, almost gently, so gently you don't even feel it happening. The gravity of the ordinary doesn't look like a crisis. It looks like a normal life. It looks like everyone around you. And that is precisely what makes it so dangerous. Most people measure their financial health by whether they're surviving. If the bills are paid and there's food on the table, the system registers as working. But surviving and building are two completely different things. And the gravity of the ordinary is masterful at keeping you in survival mode while making you feel like you're doing fine. Here's what's actually happening beneath the surface. Your brain was not designed to build wealth. I want you to sit with that. Your brain was designed to survive. It was built over hundreds of thousands of years to respond to immediate threats, to seek immediate rewards, and to avoid discomfort at almost any cost. Every single mechanism inside your mind that governs financial behavior was calibrated for a world where tomorrow was genuinely uncertain. That world no longer exists. But the wiring does. When you feel the pull to spend money you haven't technically saved yet, that's not weakness. That's dopamine. When you avoid opening your bank statements because the number makes you anxious, that's not irresponsibility. That's a stress response. When you choose the slightly more expensive option because it feels safer, more comfortable, more familiar, that's your nervous system doing exactly what it was designed to do. The problem is that all of these ancient, deeply human responses are catastrophic in a modern economy, because the modern economy is not a jungle. It's a compound interest machine. And compound interest doesn't care about your feelings. It doesn't care about your circumstances. It doesn't care about your intentions. It only cares about time and behavior. And if your behavior is governed by a brain optimizing for the next 5 minutes instead of the next 5 years, you will lose every time, without exception. This is what I call the temporal trap, the invisible cage where the urgency of now constantly defeats the logic of later. You know the right thing to do. You've probably known it for years. But knowing and doing are separated by something most financial advice never addresses: the raw biological reality of being human. Let me give you a number. One number that changes how you see everything. If you take a single dollar and double it every year, in 10 years you have $1,024. In 20 years you have over $1 million. In 30 years you have over $1 billion. $1. 30 years, $1 billion. That is not a trick. That is mathematics. That is the fundamental architecture of how wealth actually builds. Now here's the part that breaks people. Almost no one can perceive that curve. The human brain is linear. We understand addition. We do not intuitively feel multiplication. So when the early years of building wealth look modest, look slow, look almost invisible, and they always do, most people conclude that it isn't working. They abandon the process. They search for something faster, something more dramatic, something that feels like progress. And that search for the fast solution is precisely what destroys them. I have a term for this. I call it the velocity illusion. The deeply seductive belief that speed is a signal of progress, that if something is growing slowly, it must be broken. That if a smarter, faster path exists, you're obligated to find it. The velocity illusion sends people chasing returns that never arrive, investing in things they don't understand, and trading the one asset that cannot be replaced, time. Speed feels like winning. Patience feels like waiting, but in the architecture of real wealth, patience isn't passive. Patience is the strategy. There is a second system at work here, and it operates in broad daylight. I call it the consumption identity, the quiet, powerful belief that what you own is who you are. It's older than marketing. It's older than capitalism. Human beings have always used possessions as signals of status, of belonging, of worth. That instinct doesn't vanish when you understand it, but understanding it gives you a choice. The wealthiest people I've known over my lifetime share one trait that almost no one talks about. They are not impressed by things. Not because they're miserly, not because they don't enjoy life, but because somewhere along the way they separated their identity from their consumption. They stopped buying things to feel something and started building things to become something. That shift is quiet, radical, and available to anyone willing to make it, because here's what the inconsum identity actually cost. Not just the price of the object. Every dollar spent on something that depreciates, meaning something that loses value the moment you own it, is a dollar that cannot compound. It cannot grow, it cannot work for you while you sleep. It is simply gone, exchanged for a temporary feeling. I'm not telling you never to spend money. I'm telling you that every financial decision is either feeding your future or feeding your present. And most people, without realizing it, have spent their entire lives feeding only the present. So how do you escape? The first thing you have to accept is that escaping the gravity of the ordinary is not a single dramatic decision. It is not a moment. It is a recalibration, a slow, deliberate, daily reorientation of how you see time, money, and your own identity. It starts with what I call the minimum viable investment habit. Not the optimal amount, not the amount that will make you rich fastest, the minimum amount that breaks the psychological barrier between someone who invests and someone who doesn't. Because the actual dollar amount in the beginning matters far less than the identity shift that comes from acting like someone who builds. Once a week, without drama, without complexity, you move something forward. You put something to work. You make one decision that your future self will be able to look back on and recognize as the day the direction changed. The second step is what I've always called productive ignorance, the disciplined refusal to know too much about the noise. Every day, the financial world produces an enormous volume of information designed to make you feel like you're missing something. Prices moving, headlines screaming, everyone convinced that something massive is about to happen. And almost all of it, over any meaningful period of time, is irrelevant. The investors who've built real wealth are not the ones who knew more. They're the ones who filtered more, who protected their attention, who understood that in a world drowning in information, clarity is a competitive advantage. The third and perhaps most important step is to begin thinking in decades rather than months. Not because patience is a virtue in some philosophical sense, but because the math demands it. The curve does not reward the impatient. It does not negotiate. It does not accelerate for anyone who is unwilling to wait. And so the most sophisticated financial move available to any person at any income level is simply to extend their time horizon beyond where their emotions feel comfortable. But here's what changes everything. Not the strategy, not the tactics, the identity. Because every behavior I've described, the short-term thinking, the consumption reflex, the velocity illusion, those are the behaviors of someone who unconsciously believes they are not the kind of person who builds wealth. That belief is never spoken, it's rarely even conscious, but it governs behavior with extraordinary precision. The shift from broke to building is not at its core financial. It is existential. It is the moment when you stop seeing wealth as something that happens to other people, luckier people, smarter people, and start seeing it as the natural output of a certain kind of thinking applied consistently over time. That kind of thinking is available to you right now. It costs nothing to begin, and it begins not with a number, but with a question. Am I making this decision because of who I am today or because of who I intend to become? I want to leave you with something that I think about often, even now at my age. Time is the only asset that cannot be created, borrowed, or recovered. Every other resource can be replenished in some form. Time cannot. And the great tragedy of financial life is not poverty. It is not failure. The great tragedy is arriving at the end of your working years and realizing that the only thing standing between you and financial freedom was a slightly different set of choices made slightly earlier with slightly more patience. Most people don't stay broke because they lack the intelligence to understand wealth. They stay broke because they underestimate the cost of waiting, overestimate the complexity of starting, and never fully reckon with the fact that the clock is running regardless of whether they're ready. You can't stop the clock, but you can decide right now what it's counting toward. The game is long, the curve is patient, and the only real question is whether you are willing to be patient with it. The people who answer yes quietly, stubbornly, year after year, are the ones who end up free.